ulit ako.
Oo. Dito sa
Check. Okay.
I-unmute mo daw siya sandali. Hello, test, test. Test mic. Test mic. Microphone of the minister, test. Okay na dyan sa labas?
Yes po. Okay po. Parinig po.
Hello, mic test. Marinig dyan sa loob.
Copy po.
Opo.
Marinig.
Copy, copy.
Assalamualaikum everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning sa ating mga friends and partners online joining us via Zoom. This is the third leg of our Online Kapihan child-based reporting in the new normal. Ganda ng lighting namin ngayon because today we are right here at the office of the Minister in the Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education. Hindi pa po tayo live but we would like to greet everyone joining us online. Maraming salamat po. Once again, this is a joint partnership between the Bangsamoro Information Office, UNICEF Philippines, and of course, the British Embassy in Manila. Mamaya, we will be going online at we hope that everyone invites their friends, their workmates, and everyone interested in learning more about Bangsamoro education during the pandemic. Yan po. Kumusta nga ba ang ating new normal para sa mga nag-aaral? Ironically, ganito rin yung setup. Zoom, mostly yung mga higher education. Of course, yung iba nasa modular format. But these are some of the things na malalaman pa natin mamaya. Where are we now in the Bangsamoro? So again, our dear friends from the IOs, from the different ministries and offices, nagkikita-kita na naman tayo ngayong umaga, no? Sana pa walang magkasawaan because this is the third out of the four-leg online kapihan. Ayan. So, ang ganda ng lighting natin today, no? Ang ganda nitong conference room dito sa MBHTE. Again, our discussion for this morning is all about the impact of COVID-19 on education of Bangsamoro children. Yan po. Kumusta yung mga chikitings natin? We will find out mamaya. How are they in school? No? And what are the measures taken by the ministry to address these concerns? And po, some of our dear friends in the media are already joining us here live. Namin, tawa ko kay Miss Mimi. Namin niya binibigay na papers dito. And so we have our friends from the media already joining us in person. So medyo hybrid tayo this time around. While observing the minimum health protocols, we have media friends here in the conference room while some are joining online. So mamaya meron tayong Q&A with our dear minister and of course Mr. Andrew Morris of UNICEF Philippines. At malalaman natin yan mamaya kung ano yung mga questions prepared by our media partners. Morning po sa ating dear media partners from Bandera. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Good morning to each and everyone. Welcome to the third Media Forum on Accountable Child-Based Reporting in the New Normal. Our topic for this segment is the impact of COVID-19 on education of the Bangsamoro children. Again, our activity for today is hosted by the Bangsamoro Information Office, formerly known as the Bureau of Public Information, BARMM, and in partnership with the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom through the British Embassy in Manila. And of course, as always, our dear friends from UNICEF Philippines. Before we begin, let us start this program through the Philippine National Anthem and the Bangsamoro hymn.
Mga kabayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiging pero sa sirahanan, alam ng puso sa titik ko'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuyak ka ng magiging, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisigil, sa nagatang tutok sa simoy at sa langit ang pagaw, ay hinatang tula, kawin sa pagkayang minamahal, ang isang lang tumatawag ko'y tagumpay na nagtitindig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan ang may di magtitindig, lupa ng araw ng walhagit pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo, aming ligaya na pagkay mga amin, at mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Simula noon hanggang ngayon,
Right. As we proceed, magpapakilala muna ako ulit. Once again, my name is Georgiani Sinsuat, as always from the Bangsamoro Information Office, and I will serve as your moderator and MC for today's forum. If you have questions or comments sa ating mga kasamahan dito sa Zoom call ngayon, you may do so by dropping a message in our chat box. Of course, we are also streaming live by the Bangsamoro Government's Facebook page and cross-posted via our partners and social media pages. For our dear friends in the Facebook Live audience, please share our streaming to your friends and colleagues for today's program. And of course, a special note lang po, for the first time, we are also being streamed through the Panduan no MBHTE, a very special coverage for today's third leg of our Online Kapihan child-based reporting in the new normal. Again, we are going to you live through the 99.0 Voice FM DXJZ Panduan no MBHTE. Again, we are coming to you live right here at the office of the Minister of the Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education. So ang ganda ng lighting natin ngayong umaga, no? We are hoping na yung ating dear friends sa ating fourth leg, no? Medyo no pressure, but the lighting today is very good. Aabangan natin yan for our fourth leg. Again, this is our third from the four-part webinar series entitled Online Kapihan, Accountable Child-Based Reporting in the New Normal. Each part of the series features an in-depth discussion on different children's issues including health, nutrition, education, and child protection in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. Today's segment focuses on education. We will hear about the status of education in our Bangsamoro and how the pandemic affected this sector. Ano nga ba yung mga plans for the learning of our children in the next months and years? And of course, we will also hear about the safe return to school of our children, why it matters, and what would be the cost if schools remain closed. Ayan. We invited experts from the Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education and our staunch partner, UNICEF. Today, we will be joined by the MBHTE's minister himself, Minister Mohagher Iqbal, and the Chief of Field Office for Mindanao UNICEF, Mr. Andrew Morris. Minister Iqbal will give us updates on MBHTE's side, while Mr. Morris will give us the UNICEF stand on the safe return to school of learners here in the Bangsamoro. In today's forum, we are joined by our colleagues from the media sector, information officers from different ministries and provincial offices of Maguindanao, Lanao del Sur, Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi. Our different stakeholders from MBHTE are also joining us both in Zoom and in our FB Live. Special shout out lang po sa foundation of our society's learning, our dear teachers and school heads. This episode is dedicated for all of you who keeps on making sure that the children are educated even during these trying times. We also have parents who are watching us through the live streaming and are probably interested to hear the updates from our experts. And of course, we also have our colleagues from UNICEF led by Mr. Andrew Morris. Finally, we would also like to extend our courtesies and gratitude to the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom, led by Mr. Alistair Toti, the Deputy Ambassador to the Philippines of the British Embassy. On behalf of the Bangsamoro Information Office and our Director Amin Andrew Alonto, welcome to this Online Kapihan. Before we start, we would like to encourage everyone to write a piece, develop a story or any content, a photo collage, short video, or an editorial on health and nutrition, and please share it with us or upload that in your social media accounts. Don't forget to tag us, the Bangsamoro Government page at Bangsamoro GOVT, the British Embassy in Manila page at UK in the Philippines, and UNICEF at UNICEF Philippines, so we can also share your stories. So let's begin. Before we go on the resource persons, we would like to welcome for a very short yet meaningful message one of our co-hosts for today's activity. May we call on Mr. Mubarak Pandi, the Regional Information Officer of MBHTE, for his message. Sir Moby?
Thank you very much, Brother Georgiani, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. Good morning. Thanks to all our media partners who joined today's Media Forum webinar on child-based reporting in the new normal, focusing on accountable media reporting on Bangsamoro children. My courtesies also to our development partners from the UNICEF and the UK government, as well as to our dear Minister Mohagher Iqbal and his officials joining us this morning. Today's Media Forum provides an opportunity for the Ministry of Basic, Higher and Technical Education to share its interventions to the continuity of education in BARMM despite the pandemic. Across the world, the education sector is still reeling from the impact of COVID-19. However, the pandemic did not stop the MBHTE from exploring ways and means to continue education services under the so-called new normal. Since the onset of the pandemic, the Department of Education's battle cry has been education must continue. In Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, we are happy to note that education has continued. Our own battle cry has been no Bangsamoro child will be left behind even during the pandemic. Like the UNICEF and our other development partners, the MBHTE as an educational institution also upholds children's right to quality education that should be relevant and responsive to the needs, ideals, and aspirations of the Bangsamoro people. MBHTE's education interventions, working with different sectors and development partners, are anchored on these principles. Our dear Minister Mohagher Iqbal will talk about more of the MBHTE's interventions later on. Lastly, the MBHTE subscribes to the African proverb that says, it takes a village to raise a child. We are grateful to our dear friends in the media for doing your share in helping educate parents and communities, especially those in hard to reach areas, about MBHTE's COVID-19 prevention and mitigation measures since the onset of the pandemic. Indeed, the media sector plays a crucial role in upholding calls for children's right to education and ensuring the safety of children in our communities through information campaigns on COVID-19 prevention and mitigation. Thanks to our media partners for your unwavering support to the ministry and the BARMM government as a whole. I would also like to thank the Bangsamoro Information Office under the leadership of Director Andrew Alonto for hosting this event today. I look forward to meaningful discussions throughout the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sir Moby. Indeed, our media partners who are here with us today, as well as our viewers, are excited to hear from our dear experts, especially from your ministry centered on education. Now, hindi na natin patatagalin pa. Let us begin the first session of this kapihan. Let us all welcome Minister Mohagher Iqbal of the Ministry of Basic, Higher and Technical Education to tell us about the region's goal of educating every Bangsamoro child. Minister Iqbal, please take it away, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I pray that you are in good health and in high spirits, despite the despite the difficulties caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. In these trying times, BARMM officials and civil servants are called upon to embody values such as perseverance, transparency, accountability, compassion, and resourcefulness. In other words, it is no longer acceptable In other words, it is no longer acceptable to implement projects in a predictable and business as usual manner. We need concrete results on the ground which are tangible and seen and attested by everybody. For instance, the Ministry of Basic, Higher and Technical Education has tirelessly worked to craft policies and implement programs that respond to the new normal and deal with the various issues that have unjustly affected the Bangsamoro education sector last 2 or 3 decades. The MBHTE, as mandated by the Bangsamoro Organic Law and guided by moral governance, will address the needs of our communities and implement the critical strategies in the BARMM. Our programs align with the ministry's 12 key priority areas. Number 1, comprehensive and learner-centered Bangsamoro Education Code. Number 2, 1 million enrollees. 3, accessible education opportunities for all learners. Number 4, prioritizing the welfare of students and disabilities. 1 professional per family in the Bangsamoro. Number 6, quality and competent teachers and education managers. Number 7, schools as safe spaces for learning and development. Number 8, comprehensive health and nutrition school-based programs. Number 9, collaborative working relationship with local government units and community leaders. Number 10, parents as MBHT partners who are willing to invest in education of their children. Number 11, application of transparent governance standards. And number 12, best practices from international experience which the MBHTE can adapt to our context. Our 12-point agenda is based on our aspirations for an inclusive, balanced, relevant education system in the Bangsamoro. Furthermore, these points are reflected in the flagship programs under the basic education, madrasa education and Islamic studies, higher education, and technical education and skills development. Since COVID-19 has compelled us to suspend face-to-face interaction, the Education Continuity Plan for school year 2020 to 2021 will help us deliver education services for our learners under challenging circumstances. Admittedly, the pandemic has slowed down our operations and crusade for long-term reform since I took my oath as your education minister in 2019. Nevertheless, the ministry is profoundly committed to delivering the essential services to the Bangsamoro education community, especially our children and the young people. Solutions to existing problems are further laid out in the proposed Bangsamoro Education Code. Once Bangsamoro Parliament approves the Education Code, the ministry will strengthen the Bangsamoro education system. For instance, the ministry will apply innovative, context-based, and inclusive policies or mechanisms across the 4 subsectors on various areas, such as but not limited to 1. Development of relevant and appropriate curriculum and competency standards. Number 2, effective use of learning assessment mechanisms. 3, the hiring of a qualified teacher through a merit-based and legal process. 4, support of the professional development of MBHTE personnel. 5, use of quality textbooks and learning materials. And number 6, standards for school infrastructure, management, and quality assurance. Of course, the ministry will not work alone. We will engage with other education stakeholders from the regional government down to the local government units to ensure support for implementing the regional and division educational programs and the school improvement plans. Moreover, we will also welcome partnership from the international community and civil society groups, with the caveat that interventions will prioritize the Bangsamoro people's needs. All concerned parties must cooperate for the realization of the Bangsamoro education goals. Speaking of partnerships, we want to thank the UNICEF, the United Kingdom Government, and the Foreign Correspondents Association of the Philippines, or FOCAP, for supporting this webinar series on child-based reporting in the new normal. We are pleased that the MBHTE regional and division information officers are participating in this webinar series. The ministry understands that communication is a vital instrument during a crisis. We recognize the significance of the timely dissemination of information on education and acquire critical feedback from our constituents. The ministry is developing its strategic communications strategy and multi-platform communication system with the support from the Australian government. The BARMM government has the opportunity to chart our political, economic, socio-cultural future and establish the foundation for just peace and development. Similarly, the Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education is keen to establish an inclusive, relevant, useful, and transparent Bangsamoro educational system. We anchored the Bangsamoro education on a holistic approach to prioritize the learner's intellectual, spiritual, psychological, and physical growth. Furthermore, the education system shall be rooted in the diverse context of the Bangsamoro learners. It will ensure equal access to all regardless of beliefs, culture, ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic background. I am confident that the MBHTE and all education stakeholders are up to the challenge. We must harness the necessary political will to observe the Bangsamoro Organic Law and implement the vital programs through legitimate means. Let us prioritize and protect education as an imminent right of every Bangsamoro. For the benefit of the Bangsamoro region, we must acknowledge that leaving no child behind starts with quality education. Thank you very much to UNICEF, the United Kingdom Government, and the Foreign Correspondents Association of the Philippines, and the Bangsamoro Information Office for inviting the MBHT to this significant event. I leave you with a quote from the late Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General. Knowledge is power. Information is liberating. Education is the premise of progress in every society, in every family. Mabuhay po tayong lahat. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Minister Iqbal. Jazakumullahu khairan. It was indeed a very informative piece. We are enlightened by the situation on the ground, and hopefully we can figure out ways of collaboration, especially on reaching out to the different communities through different information and communication platforms. We are one with you in hoping for greater years ahead for our Bangsamoro region, especially in our education sector, inshallah. If you have questions on Minister Iqbal's presentation, please drop them on our chat box sa mga kasama namin dyan sa Zoom. No? So far, sana hindi pa kami nag-freeze. You may do so by dropping your questions in our Zoom call. Of course, we would be noting those for later's Q&A session. Now, let us move on to our next speaker who will share with us why safe return to school is a priority. And not just a priority, but definitely an urgent one. Yan. Please welcome the Chief of Field Office of the UNICEF, Mr. Andrew Morris. Sir, please.
Yes, good morning. Could I just check that you can hear me clearly?
Yes, sir. It's a go from here.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Well, first of all, good morning and respects to Minister Iqbal. thank you very much to the Bangsamoro Information Office for organising this third media forum. And of course, respects to our colleagues who are with us from the British Embassy in Manila, who are supporting UNICEF for this forum. I think over the past year now, since the beginning of COVID, most people have focused on the health impacts. That's had the headlines, the big stories, but actually, although children have been impacted to a lesser extent in terms of catching COVID, in terms of number of infections, the impact of COVID on children has been devastating. And the impact on education for children is part of that, and I'll expand on this. The World Bank, in their household survey, found that only around 20% of children were able to continue learning during community quarantine periods. And the 20% of children who were able to continue learning are mostly in the better off families. Poor families, even fewer children. In the Bangsamoro region, as we're all aware, almost 900,000 children who were enrolled in learning in the last school year had to stop their education in March. And for most of those, they haven't yet been able to restart learning to an acceptable level of quality and frequency. I think the ministry has made great efforts in BARMM to ensure that children who have access to computers and laptops and gadgets can continue to learn through online means. The ministry has introduced the blended home-based learning approach, but neither of those approaches has been fully able to cover the needs of all children. Families that don't have gadgets, computers, poor connectivity means that their children really can't learn online. Home-based learning has recently started, but with both parents in the Bangsamoro region having to work, with most of those parents not having gone through the full basic education themselves, really the children, even those enrolled in a home-based blended approach, cannot learn to the same quality and standards as they have been used to in the classroom through the face-to-face means. And that's not only been recognized here and in the Philippines, but in countries around the world. This is now accepted. That online and home-based learning are second and third choices, and really there is no substitute for face-to-face in a classroom with a teacher. Now, what does that mean for children? Well, the impact on learning. Already in the Bangsamoro region, everybody's aware that children fell short on learning outcomes compared to other regions in the Philippines. So the impact of COVID has even pushed those children to the bottom of further to the bottom of the table in terms of their ability for maths and numeracy, literacy, for example. we already see a large number of dropouts. Even pre-COVID, this was an issue. Children not moving, transitioning from primary education into secondary. Children dropping out after the first year or two of secondary education and not completing the full basic education. So we already saw that, and there are many factors: the poverty of their families, the need for those children to enter the workforce, many reasons. With schools closed, with no alternatives for online or effective home-based learning, we're afraid that the number of children dropping out is actually going to be the highest ever in the Bangsamoro region. And because of poverty, because of the need for families to engage their children in helping out around the home, to contribute to the household income, any children who drop out are at real risk of not going back into the education system at a later date. We're all aware of the shortfalls in the alternative learning systems. That's something where we commend the ministry for a good roadmap and plan to improve alternative learning for children who have missed out, who did not complete. But at the moment, that's not going to help a lot of the children who have dropped out or are at risk of not going back to school over the coming year. There's a real risk that children are not going to return to school at all, even in the next academic year. Now on learning, that's clear, and that's what we focus on when we talk about the impact on education. But there are other impacts. Mental health and mental well-being of children. Schools are children's second homes. Teachers are like second parents. That time when children can spend with their friends in that environment has tremendous positive impacts on mental well-being of those children, and in terms of a protective environment for those children. There's so many examples where cases of violence and abuse and neglect are first detected by teachers. So teachers and schools and those friendships, that environment is very, very protective and supportive of mental well-being for children. Now, if you put that together, the shortfalls in learning, the shortfalls in mental health and protection, it means that those children in the Bangsamoro region at the moment are really going to miss out on opportunities for future. They will not develop to their full potential. The families are missing out on opportunities to break the cycle of poverty by getting their children through a full basic education and opening up work and different work opportunities for them. These are some of the wider impacts on negative impacts of COVID on school children. There's also one other issue which we're always concerned about, is that the impacts of COVID on education and impacts on wider peace processes in the Bangsamoro region. When you look at one of the main factors expressed by families 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, they want education for their children. Families in the Bangsamoro region want their children to have a better life than they did. And so education and learning and opportunity for this generation of children and adolescents and young people is really something that cannot be separated from the Bangsamoro peace process in terms of how families, parents, communities view progress in the Bangsamoro region. Everyone's aware of that, and I think it's great that the Bangsamoro Information Office with media are able to communicate to families and the population in the Bangsamoro region so that everybody understands that COVID is a reason not only for health impacts but also for negative impacts on education and protection, and that families understand that, and that the families don't come back and say, we are disillusioned with the processes involved in the formation of the new Bangsamoro region and the parliament. So I think the media also have responsibility to communicate and explain that. So I think those are some of the wider impacts. Now, so what does UNICEF think about this? Well, globally, including in the Philippines here, our position is clear. That education is so important for the reasons I explained, not just because of learning. Education is so important to development and opportunity and the rights of children, and in conflict settings, it's important to peace processes, that schools should only close as a last option, and schools should reopen at the earliest opportunity. And everything should be done to make sure that schools stay open and deliver safe, face-to-face learning for children as a priority. Now, it's very, very clear that's the position. And if you look at the science and the data from around the world, it's very clear. The youngest children have very few COVID infections. Children in primary and elementary, yes, there are some children in primary elementary who may be exposed to the risk of COVID, but compared to the general populations, the numbers of school children infected with COVID are very, very few, which means they are not at the same level of risk as adults. And if you look at all the data, even from the Bangsamoro region, and the ages, the people who are hospitalized and ill and infected, children are hardly reflected in that data. They're a population group that have been spared the greatest health impacts. Now, when you get to the slightly older age groups, adolescents and young people, and many of course, the adolescents are also school children. If you look at the data from around the world, you begin to see some COVID infections and therefore risks of transmission. I don't think the data is available fully for the Bangsamoro region. But if you look at the data that is available and you combine that with the global data, that picture that I just explained applies here. So there are very, very low risks for children to attend early learning classes. There are very low risks for children to now go back to primary and elementary. There are slightly higher risks for children who are going back into secondary. But we can't say that the risk is the same for all age groups, all classes, And we can't say that the risks are the same across the whole of the Philippines, the whole of the Bangsamoro region. Indeed, comparing across municipalities, risks are going to be different. But it's very, very clear that we can't afford another 1 or 2 years with schools closed as they are. Now, it puts the Ministry of Education, and Minister Iqbal is very aware, of course, it puts the ministry in a very difficult position, because on the one hand, there's the national task force guidance, the DepEd Central national guidance, very much based on the national guidance. So, but at some point, someone has to say, this is such an important issue that the risks are low enough that children can resume face-to-face, but in a different way than before. No one can advocate at the moment that children go back to face-to-face classes as they did before. There has to be something which is going to ensure their safety, because of course, by balancing risks, we are talking about the best interests of children. We feel that the best interests are for an earlier return to face-to-face classes in a controlled way, in a safe way, applying guidelines, perhaps with decisions decentralized to local authority areas to be able to close a school quickly if they happen to have some adult cases in their municipality. And I think importantly, prioritizing teachers for the new rollout of the COVID vaccine. It's clear that children are at very low risk of severe illness. There's been a case made to keep schools closed because teachers need to be protected. It's a valid point, but there are several things that can be done to make sure that face-to-face classes can reopen safely. UNICEF globally, with partners, has issued guidance on reopening of schools, a framework. Here in the Bangsamoro, together with many of the health and MBHTE colleagues, UNICEF has been working on infection prevention and control measures for schools, so that as soon as a school decides to reopen, they can do so safely. I would expect parents to be hesitant at first. There's been so much communication, information, media coverage of the risks of COVID, quite rightly. But I think parents will need to receive information to help them understand the risks to their own children of a return to school when that happens. I think for the Bangsamoro region, our health staff, the health team, as we know, the Ministry of Health and Minister Usman's team look very, very carefully at every single day at the data for COVID. The new cases, where they rise. There are a large number of areas in the Bangsamoro which quite frankly has either no cases, no suspect cases, or very, very few. I think by decentralizing the decision making to local level to determine whether some face-to-face, maybe for early learning classes and kindergarten at first, maybe for elementary, second, in areas where the risks of transmission are very low, with strong procedures for quick decision making should there be a spike in cases in any area, because then schools may need to re-close. And importantly, I think we should all start to be advocating for COVID vaccination for teachers at an early stage. Yes, the highest priority in the Philippines, we know, is for the health workers, the frontline health workers, for elderly persons. But there's a case for bringing up to a higher priority for teachers. This is not just for the Philippines. If you look at many countries around the world where they have prioritized their vaccination programs, teachers have come up on the priority scale because of the recognition of the importance of education, keeping schools open, and reducing the risks of illness to the teachers. So I think for UNICEF, it's very, 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 very clear. Of course, the decisions are for the Philippines government, the national task force, the regional task forces, the ministries, education and health. Those are the decision makers. But I hope that my explanation here has given a little bit of background as to why you can read and you will hear UNICEF saying schools should close as a last resort, should reopen first, and that the priority now is really to see how to perhaps modify the face-to-face classes so children who are not learning now, who are at risk of not learning quite frankly for the next couple of years, that they will have an opportunity. It's not easy, but the technical advice and support is there from organizations like ourselves, the World Health Organization, and many of the documents and recommendations on the reopening of schools and safety globally are actually joint documents prepared by the World Health Organization and UNICEF. You know, we look to our sister health agency, the World Health Organization, for the data, for the science, when we issue global guidance. So perhaps I will stop there. Just like to thank all the media for their tremendous role in reporting on children's rights violations, and doing that in an ethical way. There's probably no other bigger issue at the moment for media to report on responsibly than getting children back to school and learning, and a successful rollout of the new COVID vaccination. There's a lot of misinformation about the COVID vaccination. We all have responsibilities as organizations, as media, to make sure that families have the right information, and we should eventually see a very high coverage of the vaccination in the Bangsamoro region, which will be supportive of education and getting children back to school. But quite frankly, I don't think we can wait. I've seen the current schedules for vaccine availability and rollout, and that will change. That may change, but at the moment, it's not something that can be done within 3 months or 6 months. So it's important to come back to this point about risks to children, balance that against the risks of education. And yes, they're tough decisions, but they're the decisions that all leaders and governments need to take and take in the best interest of their population. So thank you very much for listening, and I think we're welcoming questions in the chat. Thank you very much.
That may greatly affect MBHTE's development agenda. Number two, what would be the backup plan of the Bangsamoro government, especially of the MBHTE, should there be a non-extension? And number three, is it possible to incorporate some of our practices in the general well-being and citizenship in the classrooms of our students? So these are the first questions raised to our Honorable Minister Iqbal. Sir?
Thank you for all the three questions from Brother Anwar Kuda. First and foremost, I would like to state here that the Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education, in particular, and the BARMM in general, have their own plans as contained in the Bangsamoro Development Plan, and all the aspects of the Bangsamoro Development Plan are being worked out in terms of implementation, and both the Bangsamoro Development Plan contains both short-term, mid-term, and long-term plans of the BARMM government and not of the MBHTE. So we are pursuing this without let up, and we have already adopted ways and means to realize and implement those plans in accordance with the Bangsamoro Development Plan. As to the scenario for the non-extension of the BTA, I think to a certain extent, this is not a very big deal for us in the sense that the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao and the MBHTE are already in place, and we are moving forward. And For that reason, I think even without extension of the Bangsamoro transition, then our plan will proceed according to the Bangsamoro development plan. But the non-extension of the transition is really very challenging. First and foremost is that the 3-year transition is not actually 3 years because 2019 what we implemented are programs and projects that are already in the pipeline during the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao by Regional Governor Mujibataman, and the funds are the same. The project, the programs, and the funds are all belonging to the previous autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. So virtually, we don't have any major programs in 2019. And then comes 2020, and nobody expected the COVID-19 pandemic to come. And frankly speaking, we were caught flat-footed. Even in terms of funding, uh, there was no provision of funds in the Bangsamoro Appropriation Act that would respond to the COVID-19. So I say it again that we are caught flat-footed, and virtually 1 year has been robbed of us, and we are still limping as a result of this COVID-19. And then for the third year, starting now, onward up to 2020, the middle of 2022, then the problem is that the programs and projects that were supposed to be implemented and were not implemented in 2020 are being implemented right now, and together with the plans and programs in 2021, it's going to be a staggering responsibility on the effort in the effort of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. So in short, the extension is very necessary because uh, even President Duterte said that 3 years is too short, 10 years is too long. And if you look at what happened to Mindanao, especially the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, we were and we are still devastated by the effects of the almost 5 decades of fighting in Mindanao. So you cannot expect a region that is devastated by war just to be rehabilitated and developed in just 3 years. And then that's one thing. And the second thing is that if you look at transition in other complex situations in the world, it's something longer than 3 years. So we cannot expect really to put in place development projects in a very short period of time. For instance, MNLF was given 10 years in office as Normi Sori, Farouk Hussein were in office for 10 years. And, there was election, but, election was, it was not rigged, but all the oppositions or the opponents for the position of governor were asked to withdraw. And then Mujibataman has been given 8 years in office. And then for us, we negotiated for 17 long years, and until now, we are still negotiating in terms of the implementation of the agreements, especially the normalization track. So you cannot expect 3 years, 17 years of harsh and hard negotiation to be implemented in just 3 years. Then second reason why we need relief, the extension. We need to put in place a very firm and stable foundation of peace Mindanao. If we cannot extend, then the normalization track will not be implemented substantially. And then the implementation of the provision of the Bangsamoro Organic Law cannot be implemented. I think we are about 40% right now. So we need the extension for the two reasons I have just stated. As to the second question, I think as to the backup plan of the Bangsamoro government, I think we are preparing for two scenarios. We are preparing for the extension of the transition, which we are moving heaven and earth just to appeal, and hopefully government and Congress would respond to our appeal that the transition would be extended. So that's scenario one. The second one is that we are also preparing for election, because either way, I think the more assured situation is that there would be election. As to the extension, well, we have hope right now, and the momentum for the grant of extension is building up, but we are not so sure about that. So we are preparing for two scenarios. There would be extension of transition and there would be election. So we are preparing for these two eventualities. As to number three question, thinking out of the box by Brother Anwar Kuda, I think, uh, if you look at the education provision of the Bangsamoro Organic Law, and then you can also refer to the admin code. What is stated there is that the Bangsamoro education is the subsystem of the national education system. And there is a study of Islamic studies, then Arabic language education. We call it ISAL or ISALE, Islamic studies and Arabic language education. Previously, it was called ALIVE, meaning Arabic language and Islamic value education. So it enlarged to a certain extent. But if you look at what is Islamic studies, it is practically covering all the aspects of Islam. But there are gray areas because, in the Philippines, it's similar to other non-Muslim countries. There is a separation of the church and the state. But in Muslim countries, especially when it is run by real Muslims, there is no separation of church and state. So here, in our context, we need really to be very cautious. We need to be very precise because some say that Islam is a religion. But to me, Islam is a religion. It is a religion, it is a way of life, and it is a system of government. So what we are looking here is that we will not be implementing programs that can be seen by most people or all by people except Muslim as belonging to what is religious. So there is a gray area, but there is a gray area where we can probably be flexible and creative because between the religious, because in Islam there is no such thing as religious. Generally speaking, there is no religious in Islam because Islam, as I said, is a way of life, is a religion, and it is a system of government. But we have to play within the context of the Bangsamoro Organic Law, and we need also to understand the complexities of the Philippine system. We cannot just do this unmindful of what the Constitution says, because that's not good and that's not proper. So, in short, we are contemplating on what you are suggesting right now. For Bangsamoro culture, it's part of the Bangsamoro Organic Law about correcting Philippine history. That would include probably at the later part of the 20th century Moro history, because before that, the Bangsamoro history is separate during the Spanish regime and even during the American. Moro history was separate. It was probably only in 1946 that Moro history is part of the larger Philippine history. Although, if you look at history, Moro history is longer than Philippine history. So I think for the moment that would be my answer.
Thank you very much, Minister Iqbal, for answering our first set of questions from Sir Anwar Kuda. I hope na medyo nasagot na po yung ating questions. And before we proceed with our questions on Zoom, again, this is a hybrid of our three-leg online kapihan. Meron pa tayong media on site. And we will first proceed with our dear friends at the media na nandito po ngayon. And then we will go back to your questions in the Zoom call. The first question comes from Mr. Ferdinand Cabrera of GMA News and of Minda News. Sir?
I'll address these questions to Minister Iqbal and to Mr. Andrew Morris. Recently, I talked with a lot of sources from CSOs and friends from NGOs, and we noticed that in Maguindanao, there's a lot of teenagers are getting married during the pandemic, and we're more concerned. And I was talking to the provincial government officials, and they were talking though there's a law made to end the forced child marriages or the child bride, it's still ongoing. We're so concerned of the protection of the children, and during pandemic, and they're getting younger and younger. So does it me? Are we saying that can we say that pandemic somehow has an effect to this trend? And second question still addressed to both. Just last night, there's another IDED explosion, and it hit children in Pusao in Sharif Saidona, Mustafa Town, and we're concerned at if these children, what are the protection mechanisms put by the by the Bangsamoro government when they go back to the school, and still their protection when the opening of classes are imposed now. Soon the COVID pandemic will end.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ferdinand Cabrera. So let's begin first, I guess, with Mr. Andrew Morris, and then we will wrap up the questions with Minister Iqbal. So 2 questions were raised. Number 1, what are the efforts or stand of the respective agencies on forced child marriages? And number 2, how can we assure that the security of our children are protected, especially in conflict-stricken areas? So let's begin with Mr. Andrew Morris, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, we're aware of reports. If you consider that COVID has households have become poorer. Already the poverty rates in the Bangsamoro region, well over 60% of children living in poverty. So whenever there are shocks and stresses that reduce household income, all over the world, we see that where child marriages, early marriage, is a coping mechanism for this. So we would expect to see some families deciding that rather than their son or their daughter marrying at age 18 or 19, it may become 15 or 16 or even younger. So yes, this is something that we have heard. We haven't seen hard data on this, but with the Bangsamoro Youth Commission and the interagency, the UN group on adolescents and young people, early marriage, teen pregnancy is something that's listed as a priority to look at. So I think we will start looking at data. It's not an easy issue to deal with, because when you talk about family poverty and coping mechanisms, but one of the other factors we see from all over the world is that if you can keep children in school, you are actually going to reduce the number of early marriages. And so part of the strategy to reduce early marriage is around education and keeping children from poor families into school, whether that's with incentives, whether it's just through education information. But thank you for raising that. I was going to give that as an example when I referred to protection and schools as a protective environment earlier, but didn't. On the other issue, well, I think that the IED, the security incidents, those are something, again, in some instances could be exacerbated by COVID, because families are stressed, families are poorer, reasons for redo, for local conflict could be heightened because of the impacts of COVID. but the measures to address that and keep children safe are the general measures, and not going to be something specific to COVID. But thank you for raising those.
Questions. Again, number one po, what is the stand and mechanism of the ministry on child marriages and the security of our children, given that there are incidents, untoward incidents concerning security? Sir?
The phenomenon of early marriages is not only true in the Bangsamoro, but even nationwide. And perhaps I can also assume that even on global scale, early marriages is happening practically everywhere in the world. There are many factors, there are many reasons for that. And I think Andrew Morris has already provided enough explanations about this phenomenon. So I think I would not add any more to what he has said, except that by saying that, I think early marriages is one of the most contentious issues as far as Islam is concerned. In fact, this is one of the major attacks against Islam for allowing early marriages, and specifically the Orientalists are targeting no less than Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for marrying Aisha, who was barely 9 years old, although all historians have agreed, especially in the Muslim world, that the marriage was consummated after Aisha reached maturity. So, I think there are many factors why there are early marriages. One of which is the media itself. For instance, while I am not saying that it's bad in terms of providing sex education in schools, but I think, to me, on a personal note, I don't think that that would still be very important. Educating young people about sex, because it's a natural tendency, it's a natural urge of individuals about sex, because they are made really. One of the reasons why men and women were created by God is because just to continue that mankind will grow. So I don't think it's very necessarily to provide subject for sex education, and the media is really playing a great role in really in either positively or negatively contributing to early marriages, especially cinema, movies. Okay? Much of the themes of movies right now is about love. This contributed too much about early marriages. So, as I said, I cannot say further on this issue because Andrew Morris has already explained it quite well, and I think we are speaking in the same plane, except that what I added was about on the Islamic perspective. On the issue of an explosion in Pusau, practically I have to say here that Pusau, which is in the SPMX box, is the domain of the VIFF. And for the reason, as long as the VIFF are around, I don't think this will be halted. And this is the very reason why the MILF on its part is really trying very hard to reach out to the two groups within the VIFF, the Karyalan group and the Bungos group, leaving aside the third group, which is infiltrated and which is ISIS-oriented group. So we are actually communicating with the two groups. In fact, around 1,000 are already returned to the MILF. Once that the two groups are mainstream in the MILF and will join and participate in the peace process, especially the decommissioning process, I think the incidents of explosion can be reduced to the very minimum. So this is our efforts right now, and I think more and more members of the VIFF coming from the two groups will be joining or rejoining the MILF this year.
Thank you very much, Minister Iqbal, from Mr. Cabrera, and then we will proceed with the rest of the media. We have actually listed yung pagkasunod-sunod so everyone gets a chance to ask our resource persons. So, Sir Ferg.
Yeah, just follow up because we read about the stand of the Bangsamoro women on forced child marriages and early marriages. So actually, it's not acceptable to them. And second, we've learned that that's why it exists because they have not processed in the registration because it's not allowed in the law. So that's why these things happen and exist.
That question is addressed to Minister Iqbal.
Can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, so we've learned that the Bangsamoro women have stand on these forced child marriages and early child marriages, and we've learned also that this exists because there's no proper registration. Usually in the normal processes of marriages, they register in when you get married. So in their cases, as is 16, 15, they don't. They just simply go to the marriage and without these processes of registration. So I think we just want to hear what the ministry is. How do you look at this?
Frankly speaking, I am not aware of the stand of the Bangsamoro Women's Commission on the issue under discussion. So, pasensya lang po, I cannot answer that question because I do not want to answer a question which I do not really have a full view of the issue at hand. So, siguro later on I can probably provide an answer to that.
All right. Thank you so much from Mr. Ferdinand Cabrera. Question comes from Miss Odessa V. Cruz of ABC Net 25.
So, good morning. My question is addressed again to Minister Iqbal. So, sir, considering the statement of Mr. Andrew Morris that the risk for children to go back to school is low, on the part of the MBHTE, how prepared are you to open the classes in the Bangsamoro region as early as possible as suggested by the UNICEF? Kakayanin po ba natin, sir?
Jokingly aside, if we can start tomorrow a face-to-face modality, we can do it. In fact, our preparation has long been started. For instance, we are already sending armchairs to the various schools in the BARMM, as well as school children kits and other necessary materials for the eventual opening of schools. Because to me, while I fully understand and I fully subscribe to what President Duterte had said, that he would not allow face-to-face education learning, but to me, there is no substitute for face-to-face. There is no substitute. In fact, while I understand and while I respect the decision of the government and that of the BARMM, but you know, I can cite the case of my 3 children who are in the school, who are of school age. I bought them 2 computers, but what happened was that the more they are using the computers, the laptops, for playing games. So instead of learning something, and then what happened is that they are provided with an opportunity to focus on learning instead of using that for the online learning process. You see, so we are preparing. I repeat, if classes will open tomorrow, we are prepared for that because we have been longing for a face-to-face learning modality in our school.
Okay po. All right. Thank you so much, Miss Odessa.
Ayun na.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. Question comes from Miss Sandra Cerilia of Brigada News FM.
Yes, good morning po. This question is for Minister Iqbal. How Bangsamoro Government help the youth, especially children, in attaining their education status while we're facing COVID-19 pandemic? Then, pangalawa po, may ilang parents din po kasing nagpahatid sa amin ng message sa Brigada News FM na since Cotabato City is under na po sa Bangsamoro Government, may ilang skolahan pa po daw dito sa Cotabato City ang hindi pa nakakakuha ng module. How about that, Minister?
First question, I can simply say here that best efforts po. And while in some instances, best efforts result in best quality, but not in all instances that best efforts would result in best quality in terms of delivery. So best efforts po doon sa first na question. Yung sa second question po, alam po ninyo, can I speak in Tagalog? Alam po ninyo, there was an open letter unsigned, and the question or the issue raised was that many schools in Cotabato City, which are already part of the Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education in the BARMM, were not able to pay their electric bills, water bills, etc., etc., kasi hindi pa raw nila natatanggap ang MOE. Ang tanong ko naman doon, ang sagot ko doon ay, siguro hindi sila nagbayad. Kasi sa kanilang puputulan ng kuryente after 2 months. January yung pag-raise ng tanong na yan, question na yan. So ibig sabihin, hindi sila nagbayad kasi ang MOE nila sa December, galing pa yan sa national government. So January sila nag-raise, ibig sabihin, hindi sila nagbayad ng tubig nila, kuryente nila. Ang yet, sinisisi sa amin. Bakit hindi pa nila natatanggap? Kasi it's about money, it's about funds. Alam mo niyo, maraming napaplunder dahil hindi talaga accurate yung pag-release ng pera. Automatic yan pag ginastos mo ang pera ng gobyerno na hindi tamang paraan. It's already a plunder case. So, hindi pa ho nila natatanggap, although we are exerting effort together with the Education Division in Cotabato City na maiayos po namin yung mga papeles para for the eventual release of their MOE. But pag hindi pa yan naaayos po, we cannot release their MOE kasi labag yun sa batas po.
Thank you so much from Minister Iqbal. For our fourth question, coming from Okay, we will proceed sa nagparaya. Ayan. Nanlibog atong media. But sige, from DXMY, Miss Daisy Mangod, please address na lang po your question.
Good morning po sa ating lahat. Ipupukot ko pa aking tanong kay Minister Iqbal. It's been 6 months since the school year started. Are students still able to cope po ba? Have they adjusted to the new teaching methods? Mayroon ba tayong pag-aalala in terms of dropouts?
Ako ho bang sasagot yan?
Yes, Sir Iqbal. Opo. Dropouts daw po natin yung worry.
Alam mo, in the absence of what is really the most appropriate approach, what is available right now is the best effort, best approach. What do I mean by that? You know, the best approach in trying to ensure that children will learn in school is face to face. Pero we are in a new normal, which to me is an abnormal situation. So while we are longing for the best approach, which is face to face, but ang reality natin ngayon, na COVID tayo. So to me, while I am saying that there is no substitute for a face to face learning modality, but we are in a COVID situation. To me, what we have tried to implement under this abnormal situation is the best approach. That's how I see the situation. Ito nang pinakamaganda, ito nang kaya natin at ito ang most appropriate. So ito talagang pinakamaganda. How I hope that the COVID-19 will fly so soon so that we can resume the face-to-face learning modality.
May follow-up question lang po ako.
All right. One more.
Opo. Follow-up lang po. If ever po na pwede na ang face-to-face, no, bagamat pinagdidiinan natin na imposible pa sa ngayon ang face-to-face, will MBHTE advise students to be vaccinated against COVID-19?
It's a national policy. Once the policy that kailangan talaga lahat mabakuna po, we'll follow that. But for the moment, wala pa hong desisyon ang BARMM government na gagawin natin kaagad yan. We are still trying to procure following the steps of the national government. We already have 500 million in preparation para sa bakuna po ng mga tao dito sa BARMM, including school children. So ibig sabihin, pag in place na po at meron na po go signal, and then I'm so sure that the BARMM government will follow what the national government is going to implement.
All right. Thank you so much from Miss Daisy Bangod of DXMY. The next question is from Bombo Radio, Mr. Reynan Dose.
Alright. Ito po ay for Minister Iqbal. Sir, since there was no face-to-face classes, how the Bangsamoro children coped up or marked up with their classes? I mean, paano po sila nakakahabol at nakakapag-submit ng mga kailangan nila for school? And how Bangsamoro parents adjust to the online form of learning since there was no face-to-face classes? And lastly po is how Bangsamoro government help them in addressing their grievances and problems regarding in a new form of education, sir.
Alam mo ang tao ay mayroong natural capacity to adjust in every given situation. I can cite you one specific example. Kung ang isang tao ay 100 lang ang pera, so yun lang ang bibili niya, yung 100 worth ng commodity halimbawa. Kung meron siyang 1,000, yun din ang iniisip niya bibili niya. Kung may 10,000, ganun din po. So, ibig sabihin, under dito sa COVID-19 pandemic, although marami masyadong challenges, but I think the coping up ability or capability of everyone, including the parents, are really tremendous. Meron mga complaints halimbawa, pero in the whole, ang coping up mechanism and coping up ability of the Bangsamoro people in the farm is really wonderful. Wonderful. Although, kasi alam mo, sa isang tao halimbawa, you need to appreciate the situation. Kung ano dyan ang nangyayari, kung ano ang kalagayan, kung ano ang situation, you have to really to cope up and you have to adjust yourself in that situation. Do not wish for any other situation. Kasi ito na Being a revolutionary for almost 50 years, we are trained and we learn really to appreciate situation, and on the basis of situation, we come up with plans and programs. Kasi pag ang isipin mo ito, halimbawa, gusto mo pinakamagandang sitwasyon, so magkakaroon ka ng frustration kasi hindi yun ang nangyayari. So while there are challenges and the difficulties are there, but I think in general, the parents, the school teachers, school administrators, including the learners, are coping up. Not excellently probably, but they are really coping up.
Our next question is from Brother Tobin Abdullah of 99.0 Voice F10 FM.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Good morning, Sir IQ. I just wanted to ask if there are any milestone achievement or significant achievement so far during the transition period in the context of MBHTE, considering that the transition period is stricken by the pandemic.
Marami hong achievements. Ang unang-una po, despite the challenges, because we have, in the BARMM, in the arm right now, or BARMM, dalawa ho ang ministries dito, true or not, whether real or perceived, dalawa ho ang pinaka-corrupt na agencies dito, yung Ministry of Public Works and Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education, which were called Department of Public Works and Highways and Department of Education. Ito ang pinaka-corrupt according to perception of people, whether true or not, we are still validating. At saka napakarami po ang nag-inherit po namin, naman namin po ang problema rito. I can cite you one example. For instance, yung provisional teachers, provisional means temporary, and their appointment is only for 1 year. And even if they are appointed for 1 year, pero nakalagay naman dun sa appointment nila na kung sakali mayroon available na qualified na late passer, pwede silang mapapalitan even at 1 month or 2 months after their appointment. Pero 34 years na po ang marami sa mga provisional teachers have been in the payroll for 34 years. Hanggang ngayon provisional pa rin sila. So hindi ho ginalaw. Ewan ko for whatever reasons, I don't know, but namana po namin ito. So pagdating namin dito, when I assumed as Minister of the Basic Higher and Technical Education, wala na hong batas na talagang pwede kong tayuan. Kaya tinanggal po namin sila. So that's one. Probably it can be an achievement, although masakit din yan kasi maraming tinamaan. Marami mga teachers na mga kasama natin, tinamaan sila. Pero we have no other option except really to follow the law. Because following a good law in the Philippines, especially in the BARMM, is part of our moral governance. It's a moral obligation on the part of the BARMM and the ministry and myself to obey what is in the law. So it's a moral obligation. So isa yan po. So it can be classified as our achievement because no secretary of the Department of Education in the BARMM ever since have really done this one except during our time. Pangalawa po, nag-hire po kami ng about 1,600 from Maguindanao, Tawi-Tawi, Basilan, Lamitan. No single report po na kami po ay humihingi ng pera doon sa mga teachers na inaan namin po. We handed them their appointment in silver platter. Dati po kung wala kang 100,000 hindi ka ma-appoint bilang teacher 1. So, yun po. At saka marami po kami mga reforms dito which I don't think we have the time to discuss because marami naman yan. So maybe if it is required, then probably you can submit a list of what we call as our achievement. But the latest, I think this is very material to the discussion. Yesterday, we have a presentation about the results of the survey in the BARMM conducted by Social Weather Station in Manila, sponsored by an international government organizations. So doon po sa mga agencies sa BARMM na tinignan nila how the people look at the various ministries and offices, number one po ang Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education. So it shows that marami po kaming nagawa dito. Although, mas marami pa po ang hindi namin nagawa. But, as I said repeatedly, a journey of 1,000 miles start with one step. Paunti lang, very gradual, very steady lang kami po. Ang importante dito, on a daily basis, meron kami nagawa at meron kami na-accomplish.
All right. I think one more follow-up from Brother To, and then we will move on to Sir Nash. Sir?
Just a follow-up. Sir IQ, may we, can you explain to us how is moral governance being applied to education sector?
It's a policy, it's a major policy of Chief Minister Murad Ibrahim, and in many occasions he have explained that quite lengthily. But anyway, you are asking how moral governance is being applied in the Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education, because we are part of the larger Bangsamoro government, and therefore we have to follow whatever is the policy of the Chief Minister as Chief Minister of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. Yung moral governance, one way to explain that is about accountability. Accountability. Halimbawa, dito sa amin, with due respect, wala akong sinasabi, but just to provide a very clear example. Dati-dati po, dito sa Department of Education, although I can concede na maliit man ang pondo nila, maliit ang pondo nila. Kahit anong gagawin nila, maliit pa rin ang mabili ng isang maliit na pondo. Pero they have one warehouse, or at most dalawang warehouse nila. Kami, 10 warehouse namin, punong-puno po. Kasi sa amin, sinisigurado po namin kung anong pondo, binibili namin kung ano bang specify doon sa procurement. At sinisikap po namin na talagang quality po. Halimbawa, yung mga libro, mga armchairs, sinisikap po namin na quality po ang paggagawa. So, in application, what is moral governance as applied in the MBHTE? Simply stated, ganito po. Ang accountability dito sa Pilipinas, hindi ko naman sinasabi lahat, kasi ang dami naman dito naniniwala na may Diyos. Dito, ang nangyari dito, halimbawa, kung meron purchase, kompleto ang papeles, cleared ang papeles, napirmahan, and then clear sa boss. So pagkatapos noon, tapos na yung accountability. Pero dito sa amin, as applied by the ministry, kompleto ng papeles, settled na lahat ng papeles, and then clear na, napirma na lahat yan, pero pwede pa rin meron kang maitago. Di ba? So ang accountability dito, hindi lang yung dalawang process, yung papeles at tao. Dito sa amin, tinitingnan tayo ng Diyos. Anong tinatago natin, yan, alam ng Diyos yan. Kahit na hindi pa natin naisip, na alam na ng Diyos yan, di ba? Kasi ang sa amin, yung public service natin, it's not only for the people per se. Ang tinitingnan namin at inaasahan po namin, while we are serving the people wholeheartedly as part of Amalur Salih in Arabic, but we see to it that yung lahat ng ginagawa namin, may rewards kami sa day hereafter. So in short, moral governance is applying ethical values in governance, in administration, especially of the Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education.
All right, thank you so much. For our next question comes from Mr. Nash Maulana of Manila Standard, sir.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum. Good morning, Sir Minister and everybody. My question is, if there are gaps in the current blended learning mode or challenges, what is it that you would want to address most in terms of priority and urgency?
Is that a question? Can I proceed to answer the question?
Yes, yes. Um, yes, sir.
Perfect. No, no arrangement is perfect, including blended.
Experiencing technical glitches as a part of our new normal. So, ibabalik lang po natin ang linya in a few, and then we will go back with Sir Nash's question and then proceed with Minister Iqbal's answer. Okay na po ba? Sige, so repeat na lang po yung question ni Sir Nash and then proceed tayo with Minister Iqbal's answer.
Nakuha naman ata niya yung question. He didn't get the answer kasi...
Okay na po ba yung question in the part of Sir IQ? Can we proceed na lang daw po with the answer?
Yeah, okay.
Okay po.
I think the question was doon sa implementasyon natin ng modular, meron ba nakikitang mga gaps doon? So I was saying that in reality, wala naman talagang approach na perfect. Kaya kailangan natin ng certain parts of the implementation. Kailangan merong assessment and fit. So, addressing gaps. the approach of the national government. But in the BARMM, we adopted what we call the adaptive learning modality. It's different from the national approach. The national approach, it's based on the books, based on books. Pero sa amin context, kung anong nakikita ng bata doon sa bahay nila, yun ang basihan po ng module namin. Kaya medyo as far as we are concerned, we believe that yung nakikita ng bata, kahit na nasa bahay siya, pag yun ang pinag-usapan related doon sa subject at hand, medyo nakakukonek yung bata. Pero pag purely book-based, so minsan nakikita namin na binibigay na lang yung mga libro para basahin ng bata. Yung bata naman except yung talaga magagaling, ayaw naman nila talaga magbasa ng magbasa ng mga libro. So realizing that kind of shit, while we follow the general guidelines of the National Department of Education, pero being autonomous, meron kaming mga approaches na that will suit the situation being an autonomous entity, because the BARMM is an autonomous. So nagkakaroon po kami ng specific na approach given a situation, kaya we adapted yung tinasabi ko na adaptive learning modality. Context na sa bahay, kung ano nakikita, yung po ang laman po ng modules namin na binibigay sa mga eskwelahan. So ganun po, that's the way I can answer that question. Yung mga addressing gaps, siyempre, yung feedback mechanism, yung assessment, at lagi ho namin tinatawagan yung mga division superintendent para alamin kung ano nangyari sa ground. Kasi kailangan natin, we are in contact with people on the ground, not just school administrators, but
Thank you, sir. Wanted to interject on the question of Mr. Ferdinand Cabrera regarding the predict. Can I proceed to the second point? Okay. The second point is I would have wanted to interject on the question of on the concern raised or question asked by Mr. Ferdinand Cabrera on the alleged concern of Bangsamoro women with regards to registration with respect to AIDS. He probably meant marriage contract or AIDS within which a Muslim can contract marriage. Well, the Bangsamoro women, I'm sure, would know that where the civil code does not apply to them, to Muslims, the special code, that law that applies to Muslim is the Code of Muslim Personal Laws, PD 1083. So, yun, alam nila yun. There is also a process of registration dun sa Sharia. Kung nanganak ang isang Muslim, pwedeng mag-register via the Sharia court, and then they will forward it to dun sa LCR concerned, and then sa NSO.
I just want to reiterate my previous answer to the same question. You know, I have been speaking for the MILEB, for the Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education, and for the peace panel of the MILEB, and now even the Intergovernmental Relations Body. I am the co-chair on the part of the BARMM. But I don't think it's my practice that if I do not know, or if I don't have sufficient knowledge about it, and I say frankly that I cannot answer that question because simply I do not know. Otherwise, if I force myself to answer a question that I don't have enough background, I think it's not doing fair to the question and to the one who asked the question.
Yes.
So while the question has been propounded again, pardon me for saying saying again that I cannot provide an ample and probably correct answer to the question. So the question, because I'm not privy to what
you
the
very much.
Bangsamoro Women's Commission said.
Uh, Grossly vague. Uh, he failed to articulate the concern, the alleged concern of the Bangsamoro. But I believe that the Moro women knows where of they stand. Thank you very much.
Mindanao expose. Do you have questions, ma'am? Okay na po. All right. So we will sure na po, final answer. All right po. We have a question from Miss Christine Carzo of Bandera. Miss TV, can we
Hello, good morning everyone. I'm Christine from Bandera. My question is addressed to Minister Iqbal. So, first po, follow up po doon sa tanong ni Ma'am Sandra Cerilla about po doon sa budgets ng bawat school na under sa Bangsamoro region. Yung about po sa MOOE ng school sa Cotabato City, dahil po under na siya ng MBHTE, na-release na po ba yung mga budgets ng mga school under sa Cotabato City? At meron po bang chances na nagiging delay yung pagbibigay ng MOOE sa mga schools? Ano po yung reasons? Bakit po nagiging delay?
Salaries po ng teacher sa Cotabato City, nauna pa sila magsweldo kaysa empleyado at saka mga teachers ng MBHTE. Yung mga divisions, nauna pa po ang Cotabato City. Naibigyan namin sa kanila. As early as second week of January, naibigyan na namin yung salaries. Or third week probably. Naibigyan na namin sa kanila. And then, yung sa 63 barangays, naibigyan po namin last year. Ang pagkakaiba ng Cotabato City, yung lahat ng payment course through the Land Bank of the Philippines. Yung sa 63 barangays, mayroon mga private banks na doon ako-course. So we have to fix the problem because ang bangko po ng Ministry of Basic Higher and Technical Education, kasama rin po ang BARMM, Land Bank of the Philippines. So kaya medyo na antala po yung nasa 63 barangays, yung January na sweldo nila, naibigyan namin last February 2. On the MOOE ng Cotabato City, alam po ninyo ay kailangan po yung mga papeles makumpleto po. But in order to fast track para maayos po yung problema in terms of documentation, we created a sub-technical working group sa MBHTE and may counterpart po sa division ng Cotabato City para pag-usapan po yung mga papeles na dapat ayusin para ma-release po namin yung MOOE nila. I'm not informed whether that has already been settled because ang head po ng sa party po ng MBHTE ay si Undersecretary Attorney City Mariam Balahim. Siya po in charge, and then ang may counterparts ng Cotabato City. As soon as itong papeles na ito ay maayos, nandito naman ang pondo kasi naka-lodge man yan sa block grant. Ang beauty ng block grant po, yan ang pera nandito na po sa amin. Although, ang sinasabi ng Bangsamoro Organic Law, yung release po ng block grant to the Bangsamoro Government is automatic and comprehensive. Ibig sabihin ng automatic and comprehensive, wala pong pwedeng dahilan at buong-buo po kung ano ang nararapat sa Bangsamoro Government for the whole year, dapat po minsanan lang po yan ibibigay. Pero ang reality po, dahil sa naghirap din ng national government, pag-download po nila, monthly po. Pero very efficient naman na download sa amin very early in every month. Oh. So ganoon po, yung MOA ng Cotabato City po, hindi ko alam kung naayos na yan kasi 2 days ago, tinanong ko na rin, sabi nila kasalukuyan na inaayos. So rest assured that once yung documentation is already settled, then we can release the MOE of schools dito sa Cotabato City kasi nandiyan naman ang pera.
Panghuli na lang po, Minister Iqbal, as the implementing body po ng education code dito sa Bangsamoro region, so kamusta po yung coordination ninyo with BTA? Kamusta na po yung level ng code? Nasaan na po kayo ngayon?
Prime Minister, pero still the President, si Presidente Marcos pa rin ang Presidente, ang real power. So we cannot look that as a model to follow because it is under a martial law regime na wala naman talagang freedom sa panahon na yan. So medyo very challenging po ang parliamentary. So ngayon, yung Bangsamoro Code, to make the explanation very short, nung inaral po namin,